bhavatu sahano bhunaktu sahaviryam karavavai tejasvinavaditamastu ma vidvishavai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May Brahman protect us. May he guide us and give us strength and right understanding. May love and harmony be with us all. Peace, peace, peace. And good evening. So we are going to continue with the reading from the complete works of Swami Abhedananada, his lecture on the ethics of Vedanta. We read the first 2 or 3 pages last time. We'll be starting on page 327 at the bottom. This is Atma, who will be our reader tonight, and I'm Swami Atma Abhedananada. All right, so shall we begin?
Very good. The ethical law of all mercifulness is the highest law. We must love our neighbors as ourselves. Now, this is an old law discovered by the ancient sages in the Vedic period, 5,000 years before Christ. So this idea is not peculiar or novel to modern thought. Christ was not the first man to preach this law, but it is an eternal law. Why should we love our neighbors as ourselves? We love them not because of their good qualities, not because of the help that we have received from them, but because of our unity in spirit. We must recognize that they are children of immortal bliss. In spirit, we are like brothers and sisters because we ourselves are children of the immortal bliss. When we have recognized that in ourselves first, we cannot help recognizing it in others. Then we love them as we love our narrow and petty selves, and will try to help them in distress, remove their grievances, and bring them out of their misery and troubles. If they need anything that we have the power to give, we must give it. A true follower of religion of Vedanta should practice this love for neighbors, and not only for neighbors, but also for all humanity, irrespective of their creed, caste, color, and nationality. We must not think that this is a black man and there is a white man. We should not believe that the white man is a child of God and the black man is a child of devil. No, they are all children of the same God. We should cultivate that loving feeling. We must shed that race prejudice which has made us so low. We must rise superior to the color distinction. The practice of this principle will enable us to feel that the same divine thread runs through all of us. Divinity is manifesting through all human forms, whether black or white, yellow or red, wicked or virtuous. The souls are neither wicked nor virtuous. For the time being, the acts and thoughts make us wicked or virtuous. Otherwise, they are eternally pure and sublime.
So, very timely words. We're still running about this difficulty. And of course, now the general consensus of the anthropologists is that this idea of race just doesn't make any sense. You can't even define what a race is. That the genetics and the so forth are just not there. That there's difference between any distinction of races, and if anything, it's such a smooth spectrum that there's no place to draw a line. So these are very wise words of wisdom that we need through all our ages. You know what they said to the man who lived in a house of mirrors? He said, "Why should I love my neighbor?" And they said, "Because you're living in a house of mirrors." And in a sense, that's what we're doing. We are living in a house of mirrors. Everything that we see outside of us is somehow, in some sense, a projection of what's inside of us. And so we do tend to see things outside of us that are inside of us. So if you're really practicing to try to see your own immortal, blissful self inside, it'll be much easier to see that outside. And people that are happy with themselves are going to be happier with other people. And very frequently you find that people that are seem to be maladjusted to society or maladjusted with themselves, that they haven't come to terms with themselves and they need to feel better about themselves, so they find fault with everybody else in an attempt to feel better. And that just doesn't work very well. All right, well, let's continue with in religion.
In religion of Vedanta, you will notice that the souls are neither born in sin and iniquity, nor are we all children of sin. We are children of God. Sins are nothing but some of the conditions of the medium through which the soul is manifesting its powers. The medium may be imperfect, but what is behind the medium is perfect. The light may not pass through an unclean medium, or the medium may be colored with some kind of taint. But when it is cleaned off or is removed, the manifestation is perfect. So sins are nothing but mistakes which we commit on account of ignorance of the law. But every mistake is a great teacher in the long run. Mistakes have their lessons for us. We grow wiser by experience. How else can we learn? Now suppose you are thrown into a place where hundreds and thousands of machines are working, and you know nothing about them. You're a stranger. You try to touch one part, get your finger crushed, and say, well, this is terrible. And then you do not touch it again. You try another part, and therefrom you receive a fresh shock, and so you do not go near it again. That is the way we are learning all through our life, and gradually growing into fullness and perfection.
Yeah, that's very true too, and that it's better to do something and learn by your mistakes than to just be afraid to do anything and just be sort of petrified. I used to have to tell that to my math students, especially as you got into the higher realms of math, where sometimes the problems they're not just routine problems. You can't just memorize how you do this kind of a problem and apply it to everything on the test, that you actually have to think through things. And so I would say, just try something. Maybe it'll be a dead end, but maybe it won't. Or maybe it'll lead you someplace where you'll see another way to do it. You don't just sit there and think, oh, I can't do this because I've never seen it before. You have to just try something. And so life is like that. We have to just get into it. And if something doesn't work, then we try something else. And it's not a sin or a problem to try something and make a mistake. In fact, I think Vivekananda says, you learn more by your mistakes sometimes. So that's the way things go. All right, let's continue.
We've come to this world not with our spiritual eyes open, and not with that knowledge which makes us understand all these laws, but by experience we are gaining that knowledge and learning by committing mistakes. Due to ignorance, we are all bound to commit mistakes, but we must know that they are mistakes, and knowledge of laws will save us from committing them. Further ignorance is the greatest Satan that is described in religion of Vedanta. There is no other Satan outside of us dwelling in the internal regions and tempting us. Ignorance is the mother of selfishness, and therefore we should bring that light of knowledge which will dispel the darkness of ignorance. As darkness of night vanishes away before the light of the rising sun, so darkness of ignorance also vanishes when light of the rising sun of knowledge dawns upon us. That light we must get, and with that light we shall be able to understand all the laws which govern our lives, moral and spiritual. Moral laws are higher than physical laws, because physical laws only affect the physical plane, while moral laws affect our soul plane. The physical body may be dead and gone, but our individual egos will continue to exist after death, being bound by those moral laws and receive reward or punishment according to acts and thoughts which we have performed or done here in this life.
Yeah, it was interesting. The other night we were talking about the personification of evil as a person in the form of Satan, or whatever term religion uses, and how in some sense you could say that ego is the difficulty, and so we personify the difficulties of the ego, and here he's personifying it as ignorance. But that's another way to look at it, either ignorance or your ego sense. And then he mentions being selfish rather than unselfish. That's also both ignorance and the ego sense. The more you can, again, think of yourself and your neighbor as one, the more unselfish you're going to be. So all those different ways are ways of looking at it. And then I was reminded that in the Chandi, that the Chandi personifies the three aspects of the ego as these various demonic characters that the Divine Mother has to slay. And she brings knowledge. So there you go. It's all tied up in the same idea, just a different scripture and a different set of metaphors. All right, let's continue.
There is a saying in one of the oldest writings on Vedanta, and it has been said by a great spiritual teacher. Once a disciple went to his spiritual master and asked the fundamental principles of universal ethics, and the master answered in 3 words. He said, "My dear child, you learn the meaning of these 3 words and practice them in your daily life, and then you will attain to perfection." Those 3 words in Sanskrit were Dharma, Dana, and Daya. These 3 words begin with the letter D. Dharma is the first. It teaches to subdue yourself, conquer passions, restrain your senses, and rise above all selfishness. Dana is the second, and it teaches to give alms to the poor and to be charitable. Daya is the third, and it teaches to be compassionate towards all and to practice disinterested love for all. These 3 words are the sum up of the whole of Indian ethics, and they are not given as the commandments of God, but are the words which refer to the eternal ethical laws that govern our moral lives. Now, why should we subdue ourselves and control our passions? Because otherwise, we will suffer. We must conserve our energy and rise above the material and sense plane. Why should we be compassionate towards all? It is for the same reason as I have already explained. Why should we love our neighbors as ourselves? Because the wise men treat others as they treat themselves, knowing that they are all children of immortal bliss. Again, there is another ethical teaching which is very appropriate. The worldly-minded people think, this is my relative, and that is a stranger. Oh, this is my relative, that's a stranger. And this is my own, and that is not my own. But a wise man argues otherwise. A wise man thinks that all men and women are his friends and relatives. In the household of the divinity, there is no one who is not a friend or a relative. In fact, there is no enemy on that plane. All enemies become so simple through self-interest. Go behind the self-interest and see the divine spark within them. Then they would appear different. Remind them of their divine nature, and you will see that they will give up and renounce their self-interest immediately. And purity of heart should be practiced because it will help us in making our intellect bright and our heart free from selfish desires. Then our whole being will be peaceful and restful. In that calm state of mind, we see the flashes of the Supreme Being. If our minds be dispersed or distracted by worries, anxieties, cares, and sufferings, we cannot behold that beatific division, just as the reflection of the moon in disturbed water is not vivid and clear. Then it is all broken into pieces. But if you wish to see the full reflection of the moon, let the water be calm. Let the surface of the water be without any ripple, and then you will see the perfect reflection. Do not forget that illustration. The mind is like a lake, and the Lord is like the full moon. The reflection is constantly falling upon the surface of the mind, but we cannot catch it. The mind remains usually disturbed, and for its spiritualization, contemplation in solitude is necessary. We require silence, external and internal. We should make our mind silent. We should make the mind free from the eddies of desires and passions, and then we will see the reflection and will find peace, happiness, contentment, and all the divine qualities in us. Another thing that we must learn is to restrain our tongue. We must not gossip, and that is one of the ways in which our energy is dissipated. We must keep silent and must not waste our energy by being garrulous. There's a saying, he who talks much, talk in vain, so that we should avoid. Chastity in thought, word, and deed should be practiced. Absolute chastity is next to divinity. The more chaste we become in our thoughts, the purer we become in our hearts, and the nearer we proceed to the divine. Charity is extremely helpful. In all the scriptures of the world, charity is considered to be one of the greatest virtues. In trying to help others, we will not only help others, but also help ourselves. Then we rise above the plane of selfishness and sacrifice a little for the sake of others. And that is a great gain. Such sacrifice, when deliberately undertaken, chastens our emotions, ennobles our feelings, and initiates us into a higher state of life. In the Mohammedan scripture, you will find that all its followers are enjoined to practice charity and contribute at least 1/10 of their income to charitable purposes. This is to be found in the Quran. They are perhaps more charitable men than the followers of other religions, because they are steady and practice it daily by giving alms to the poor. In India, charity is considered to be one of the greatest virtues amongst the Hindus too. The Hindus give alms to the poor, give them clothes, feed them sumptuously on such festive occasions as follow or accompany the birth of a child, and in the wedding or the funeral ceremony. They invite hundreds and thousands of poor people and give them food and clothes without seeking any return. They think that it is their duty to give to the poor and to help them. And then they would build almshouses where the poor may get shelter, food, and clothes. They have charitable hospitals and dispensaries where the poor and the sick can receive help and can cure diseases from which they are suffering. Charity involves an element of self-denial, and anything which makes us forget our petty selves and think in terms of the Supreme Being is conducive to our spiritual advancement. Therefore, we should practice self-denial in order to rise above the laws which govern our lower selves.
You know, when you think about it, if you go back to those three words, and they really all involve unselfishness, each one of them involve that. On that lecture is Sevaprana, and it's not this Sunday, it's next Sunday. So a week from this Sunday, there'll be a lecture on unselfishness. And I remember in our Vivekananda oratorio, we had a song on unselfishness is the test of all religion. So that should be a good lecture, as all of them are. All right, let's see, where are we now? Shall we continue with another law?
All right. Another law which all the students of Vedanta should observe is that eternal law which is working against the law of the survival of the fittest. The ethical law is not the survival of the fittest, but is to make others fit to survive. That's a law which we should practice.
That's a nice way of putting it, isn't it? Make others fit to survive.
A student of Vedanta will first learn these universal ethical laws like non-killing, or not to kill anyone, not to steal, not to tell a lie, not to commit unjust acts, and not to be drunk. These we should precise not because
practice. I think it was supposed to be practice.
So it makes more sense that way. These we should practice not because they have been written in certain books or have come from God, but because they are the eternal laws that govern our moral lives. We should not kill anyone because we cannot give life to a dead being. Now here you may ask the question, then should we not kill animals, such as tigers and snakes? Yes, we should. In order to preserve higher beings, like human beings, we should get rid of others when they're trying to attack. But we should not kill any animals simply because they yield us pleasure.
Obviously written before tigers were an endangered species. Yes, let's go on.
We should not steal because we have no right to enrich ourselves at the expense of others. What we have honestly earned must content us, and we must remember the rights of others. Now we shall analyze all these ethical teachings which are commonly given as the commandments of God, and through the writings of Vedanta you will find a rational foundation, and then you will be able to know the universal ethical laws upon which all the religions of the world are built. There is no harm in doing things which are not, let's make sure I get this right. There's no harm in doing things which are not right, but there is great harm to ourselves. There's a statement in one of the Sanskrit writings, quote, "There's no crime in eating animal flesh, in drinking wine, or in practicing any unchaste action, because it is a natural tendency of an animal, but the restraint is great. He who can restrain animal tendencies is morally entitled to divine realization. He is entitled to become the ideal of nations. Others are living on the animal plane. If we look at these acts from the standard of an animal, the doers are all right. Let those men go on like this, but someday or others they will wake up and see that this is not the highest ideal of life. The highest ideal is different. It is the restraint which makes us perfectly contented and satisfied, and makes us rise above the ordinary life and lend a helping hand to all those who are suffering. This is a lofty ideal. Non-resistance of evil is also a great ideal. That non-resistance is very difficult to practice under the present conditions, but it has been practiced in India for centuries. Under the aggressive method of the Occidentals, they're suffering, but still they have not given up the practice of non-resistance of evil. The power of suffering is greater than that of oppressing. The oppressors will die out, but the sufferers will have their day. The golden rule, do unto others as you wish others to do unto you, is considered to be the greatest ethical law. there is something greater still, and that is to recompense evil with good. If anyone has done wrong to you, return him good. That is greater than the golden rule, and that is the ideal we should hold before our vision and practice in our daily life, so that in the end we shall be like the divine being who sends everything that is good towards all, no matter how the people may think of him. As the rays of the sun fall upon the wicked and the good alike, so let our feelings of love, goodness, and good will flow towards all, no matter whether they return evil or good. Let us practice disinterested love for all humanity and recompense evil with good.
And that ends the chapter. So the next one, if you want to bring it up on your Kindle, will be the Reincarnation lecture. And of course, this we talked a little bit about this in another context, about how sometimes non-resistance of evil doesn't quite work. I mean, like Holy Mother was able to calm the robbers by being very childlike and motherly and so forth, and she just won them over. But then there was another incident where someone was a bit deranged and was not getting under control at all, and she had to really to show a tougher side. And and of course, Rama had to fight Ravana in the Ramayana. So I mean, you have incidences where the great ones have not just laid down and and been non-resisting. They actually are, and of course Arjuna was advised by Krishna that he couldn't just practice non-resistance. It was his duty to uphold the Dharma, and other people were going to suffer if he didn't. So that's a complex issue, and probably a little bit more than we need to go into tonight. But that just gives you a brief overview of the various sides of that discussion. All right, so now we're going to go to his lecture on reincarnation. So we'll see what Swami Abhedananada has to say about that.
The visible phenomena of the universe are bound by the universal law of cause and effect, karma and karana. The effect visible or perceptible, while the cause is invisible or imperceptible, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
The falling of an apple from a tree is the effect of a certain invisible force called gravity. Although the force cannot be perceived by the senses, its expression is visible. All perceptible phenomena are but the various expressions of different forces, which act as invisible agents upon the subtle and imperceptible forms of matter. These invisible agents, or forces, together with the imperceptible particles of matter, make up the subtle states of the phenomenal universe. When a subtle force becomes objectified, it appears as a gross object. Therefore, we can say that every gross form is an expression of some subtle force acting upon the subtle particles of matter. The minute particles of hydrogen and oxygen, when combined by chemical force, appear in the gross form of water. Water can never be separated from hydrogen and oxygen, which are its subtle component parts. Its existence depends on that of its component parts, or in other words, upon the subtle forms. If the subtle state changes, the gross manifestation will also change. The peculiarity in the gross form of a plant depends on the peculiar nature of the subtle form, the seed. The peculiar nature of the gross forms in the animal kingdom descends upon the subtle forms, which manifest verily in each of the intermediate stages between the microscopic unit, living matter, and the highest, man. The gross human body is closely related to its subtle body. Not only this, but every movement or change in the physical form is caused by the activity and change of the subtle body. If the subtle body affected or changed a little, the gross body will also be affected similarly. The material body being the expression of subtle body, its birth, growth, decay, and death depend upon the changes of the subtle body. As long as the subtle body remains, it will continue to express itself in a corresponding gross form. Now let us understand clearly what we mean by a subtle body. It is nothing but a minute germ of a living substance. It contains the invisible particles of matter, which are held together by vital force. And it also possesses mind or thought force in a potential state, just as the seed of a plant contains in it the life force and the power of growth. According to Vedanta, the subtle body consists of antakarana, that is the internal organ, or the mind substance with its various modifications, mind, intellect, egoism, memory, the 5 instruments of perception, the powers of seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and touching, the 5 instruments of action, such as the powers of seizing, moving, speaking, evacuating, and generating, and the 5 pranas. Prana is a Sanskrit word which means vital energy, or the life-sustaining power in us. Although prana is one, it takes 5 different names on account of the 5 different functions it performs. This word prana includes the 5 manifestations of the vital force. First, that power which moves the lungs and draws the atmospheric air from outside into the system. This is also called prana. Second, that power which throws out of the system such things as are not wanted. It is called in Sanskrit apana. Third, it takes the name of samana as performing digestive functions and carrying the extract of food to every part of the body. It is called udana when it is the cause of bringing down food from the mouth through the alimentary canal to the stomach, and also when it is the cause of the power of speech. The 5th power of prana is that which works in every part of the nervous system, from head to foot, through every canal which keeps the shape of the body, preserves it from putrefaction, and gives health and life to every cell and organ. These are the various manifestations of the vital force of prana. These subtle powers, together with the non-composite elements of the gross body, or the ethereal particles of subtle matter, and also with the potentialities of all impressions, ideas, and tendencies which each individual gathers in one life, makes up his subtle body. As a result, in all the different actions of mind and body which all individual performs in his present life will be the tendencies and desires in his future life. Nothing will be lost.
It reminds me of when I was a kid. The first 5 nuns went from the center and the Santa Barbara Center went to India for their final vows, and so when they came back, they were dubbed the Pancha Pranas, the 5 pranas. Fortunately, they didn't try to match up each one with one of these 5 pranas. But anyway, and sadly, they've all passed away by now. Anyway, all right, we'll take a few more.
Every action of body or mind which we do, every thought which we think, becomes fine and is stored up in the form of a samskara, or impression in our mind. It remains latent forever and produces new desires. These desires are called in Vedanta vasanas. Vasanas, or strong desires, are the manufacturers of new bodies. If vasana, or longing for worldly pleasures and objects, remains in anybody, even after hundreds of births, that person will be born. Nothing can prevent the course of strong desires. Desires must be fulfilled sooner or later. Every voluntary or involuntary action of the body, sense, or mind must correspond to the dormant impressions stored up in the subtle body. Although gross, the process of nourishment, and all the changes of the gross physical body take place according to the necessarily acting causes, yet the whole series of actions, and consequently every individual act, the condition of the body which accomplishes it, nay, the whole process in and through which the body exists, are nothing but the outward expressions of the latent impressions stored up in the subtle body. Upon these rests the perfect suitableness of the animal or human body to the animal or human nature of one's impressions. The organs of the senses must therefore completely correspond to the principal desires which are the strongest and most ready to manifest. They are the visible expressions of these desires. If there be no hunger or desire to eat, teeth, throat, and bowels will be of no use. If there be no desire for grasping and moving hands and legs, will be useless. Similarly, it can be shown that the desire for seeing, hearing, and so forth has produced the eye, ear, and so forth. If I have no desire to use my hand, and if I do not use it at all, within a few months it will wither away and die. In India, there are some religious fanatics who hold up their arms and do not use them at all. After a few months, their arms wither and become stiff and dead. A person who lies on his back for 6 months loses the power of walking. There are many such instances which prove the injurious effects of the disuse of our limbs and organs. As the human form generally corresponds to the human will, so the individual bodily structure corresponds to the character, desires, will, and thought of the individual. Therefore, the outer nature is nothing but the expression of the inner nature. This inner nature of each individual is what reincarnates or expresses itself successively in various forms, one after another. When a man dies, the individual ego, or jiva, as it is called in Sanskrit, which means the germ of life, or the living soul of man, is not destroyed, but it continues to exist in an invisible form. It remains like a permanent thread stringing together the separate lives by the law of cause and effect. The subtle body is like a water globule which sprang in the beginningless past from the eternal ocean of reality, and it contains the reflection of the unchangeable light of intelligence. Similar as a water globule remains in an invisible vapory state in a cloud, then in rain or snow or ice, and again as steam or in mud, but it's never destroyed. So the subtle body sometimes remains unmanifested and sometimes expresses itself in gross forms of animal or human beings according to the desires and tendencies that are ready to manifest. It may go to heaven, that is, to some other planet, or it may be born again on this earth. It depends on the nature and strength of one's lifelong tendency and bent of mind. This idea is cleverly expressed in Vedanta. Quote, "The thought, will, or desire, which is extremely strong during lifetime, will become predominant at the time of death, and will mold the inner nature of the dying person. The newly molded inner nature will express in a new form." The thought or will or desire, which molds the inner nature, has the power of selecting or attracting such conditions or environments as will help it in its way of manifestation. This process corresponds to some respects to the law of natural selection.
Yeah, I've heard that idea expressed that when the soul is entering the body, has some degrees of freedom as to which of the samsaras, the impressions and the tendencies and the desires that they have. You can't get them all done in one lifetime usually, but there's some discretion as to which ones you can choose to try to manifest in that particular lifetime. And it's interesting how some people in their life will just some event will happen, or they'll run into a particular person or a particular book or see a particular show, and that just changes the direction of their life. They knew some impression, another latent impression gets activated at some point, and then the individual takes off on another course. And of course, the goal of spiritual life is to not necessarily go through all the desires that you have, but to start to transcend them, start to realize that you really don't want all this stuff, that it's all transitory and as many problems come as pleasures, and so that you can give up a lot of these desires thinking along that line, that they're just going to be more trouble than they're worth. So in that way we begin to clear out these desires and shorten the number of lifetimes it takes to get to the goal of realization. We're going to end a little early tonight. Perhaps we'll make this on a regular basis more like a 45 to 50 minute class rather than the full hour. So we will continue this idea of reincarnation next week. So, and of course there are many stories that you hear, and they're beginning about the time that Swami Abhedananada was talking, researchers were researching into past lives, and that's continued to today, where various psychologists research claims of reincarnation, where people, usually very young people, usually before the age of 5, children are remembering past lives and can relate details, and in some cases these details can be verified, and there are many of them that there doesn't seem to be any way that the child would have known, or that the parents would have known any of these things about another family in another village and so forth. So we might relate a couple of those next time as well. All right, let's close with a chant. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Filled with Brahman are the things we see. Filled with Brahman are the things we see not. From out of Brahman floweth all that is. From Brahman all, yet is it still the same. Peace, peace, peace.